about the time.
Hey, how's it going? Fran Merante here, and welcome to the first video of many more videos to come in this ongoing series. Each video of this series will fall under one of three categories: time, music, or me. It will be made clear at the beginning of each video which category the video being presented relates to. The order of those categories is also important and vital, as it is a priority list of where I place my focus when I interact with music. Time and music first, me last. My philosophy is the depth of your awareness of time and how familiar you are with using that awareness when interacting with a time source will determine how comfortable you will be in that situation. When you have a level of comfort, that breeds confidence, and when you have confidence, you have created a degree of freedom within your playing. Since time is inherent in virtually every piece of music we interact with, it is paramount to create a deep awareness of time. This video will help you to assess your awareness of time through the use of a few exercises. I will also demonstrate some exercises to help you deepen your awareness of time, one of which you can do without even being behind the kit. Your approach to time awareness starts with a given tempo or BPM, beats per minute, as dictated by your time source. Once you are given that, it is up to you to interact comfortably with that pulse. For now, our time source will be a metronome. Later in this series, our time source will be a tune, and that is when we will bridge the gap between our exercises today and using them when interacting with music. You will hear me use the term bridge the gap very often in the upcoming videos. And when I do, be certain to really key into it because that is really where the magic happens. Okay, time to talk subdivision and counting, or how we will divide the beats being presented by the time source. The reason we want to subdivide is to allow us to more accurately be aware of the time, so the notes we intend to play live in harmony with the time source. Today we will use three forms of subdivision and counting. Once we establish this, we will start with exercises to assess your awareness of time. The three forms of counting subdivisions are quarter note, eighth note, and 16th note. So let's start with quarter note counting. Here is a time source, and I will count quarter note counting against it. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. As you can see, this is actually not a division at all, but just a verbalization of the time being stated by the time source. Next, we count eighth notes, which actually divides each beat into two equal parts. They are counted by adding the syllable "and" to the quarter note method, like this. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So in that method of counting, you can hear each beat divided into two equal parts. Finally, we have this 16th note counting method, which divides each beat into four equal parts. So each beat will now have four syllables, okay? They will use the existing from the quarter notes, being the numbers. They will use the existing from the eighth notes, being the ands, and to them we will add the syllables e and duh between each, okay? That will sound like this. 1 e and a, 2 e and a, 3 e and a, 4 e and a, 1 e and a, 2 e and a, 3 e and a, 4 e and a. So in this method of counting, you can actually hear the other two methods. You can hear the numbers, which are the downbeats or the quarter notes, and you can hear the ands or the upbeats, which belong to the eighth note method of counting. Now that we have that established, let's assess your awareness of time and your ability to interact with it. To do that, let's move over to the kit. Okay, it's time to check in on our awareness of time. And it's my recommendation that before you can assume that you know an exercise. So let's say you're working on something in a book and you've worked on it and you got the notes there and you're going through and you're piecing it together and you feel you finally have it down. If you're able to play it, fine, but it's really worthless unless you can play it against a time source. And so that's what we're going to do here. We're going to check in on your awareness of time and your ability to play against a time source, which is paramount, as we said before, in being able to play to a piece of music comfortably. So the first thing we're going to do to check in on this is we're going to play a very basic rhythm. We're going to play one that we can all play. We've got 1 and 3 on the kick drum, eighth notes on the hat, 2 and 4 on the snare. And the first test is to count all 3 methods of subdivision against that. Okay? And that will sound like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a 1. So for time purposes, I'm just using a short example, but you would keep going through that. Once you get up to 16th notes, back your way down to eighths, then to quarters, and then do it for a good 2-3 minutes straight, just moving in between subdivisions and methods of counting on that exercise. We're going to use fatback patterns. These are popular in Gary Chaffee's system. I forget which book they're in, but they're in there somewhere. I'll put it in the description of the video what book you can find them in, but I'll also include PDFs of the cymbal patterns that I've come up with to play against these fatback patterns and use them just the way we are right now with taking the different methods of counting and applying them against them. So the next one is going to be a little bit more difficult. The next one is going to be number 2, which now puts the kick drum on the and of 1 and the and of 3. And then you're going to do your counting against that, okay? So that would sound like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 4 and 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a 1. You would continually move throughout all the exercises, and you would apply these 3 methods of counting against each one. You're going to run into some that are difficult to do, to count at the same time, and that's an indication that in that particular exercise and what it's asking you to execute, you are probably not very familiar with it, seeing as though you can't count it and play it at the same time. Very important to be able to play anything you're playing and realize how it falls against the time. So the next thing you'll do, just to get increasingly difficult, is the same exercises, but you will now accent in your counting each subdivision, just to be aware of where each subdivision falls. So the first one, number 1, would sound like this. You would accent the 1, then the 2, then the 3, then the 4 in your counting. Playing is to remain the same, okay? This is going to put the focus and force you to put the focus on your time and not your playing. Give time priority over the me, over what's coming out of our hands, okay? So the first one will sound like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 3, 1, 3, 1, 3, 1. Not a 2. 2, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. Not a 3. 1, 3, 4, 1, 3, 4. Not a 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. This forces you, once again, I'm going to reiterate this because it's important. It forces you to put your attention on the time first as opposed to what it is you're playing. Now, you're still obviously conscious of what it is you're playing, but instead of that being the first thing on your priority list and time being second, we're reversing that. We got a little paradigm shift going on here. We're going to keep the time first and foremost in our brain and the playing secondary to that, okay? That's going to keep you locked in nicely when it comes to applying this stuff musically, all right? So you're now going to want to continue with the next method of subdividing. I just did quarters. Now we want to do eighths, okay? And you're going to move through those subdivisions, accenting each one, okay? That'll sound like this. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 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 1 and 2 and 3 and If you can do these with relative ease, you're pretty, you're at a pretty good place in your ability to put time first, okay? To get more difficult, you're now going to go to the 16th note. I'm not going to go through all of them, just a few examples, and you'll get it. You just keep accenting throughout the subdivisions, the different syllables, okay? So here goes that 16th note. A little slower. 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a 1E and a 2E and a 3 and a 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a we'll skip to the duh of 1. 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and so on and so forth. You get the idea. So as you can imagine, when you move throughout these exercises and the kick drum starts to move and you're doing the same thing with your counting, it gets even more difficult. So another great exercise to do, move from one to the next, and each one you go to, make sure you utilize all three methods of your counting and subdividing, and move throughout the subdivisions for each one, accenting the subdivisions. You may find one particular subdivision, say in the 16th note counting, that gives you a problem, like the duh, say. Whenever I count the duh, it always seems like it throws off what I'm playing. Well, cherish that, because you just found something that's going to make your playing better when you overcome it. All right? So important to realize that. So the next level of doing this would be to kind of count in your head and just say the syllable against what you're playing. So for an example, we'll use the very basic playing pattern, number 1, and we will call out the E of 1. 1E and a 2E and a 3 and a 4E and a E. 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 Then you would go to the and. It sounds like it's a lot of work and it would take a lot of time. It'll take you a little bit of time, but it's not really that bad. So as soon as you find yourself comfortable with a subdivision, play it a few times and move on to the next one. You're looking for that gold, the gold being the difficulty. When you find one that you're having difficulty with, again, that's a clue. You need to work on that. Once you get that and you're comfortable with that, then move to the next one. All tremendous exercises for putting time first and you're playing second. So to get a little bit more difficult, what you can do is keep the same hand pattern, 2 and 4 snare, 8th note hi-hat, and say out of a book like Syncopation, specifically page 34, if you go to that page and you look at the rhythms on that page, look at the first line. I believe the first one is 1 and 2 and 3, 4, 1 and 2 and 3, 4. Play that part with your kick drum while your hands are playing the hand part from the previous exercises. And then again, work through, starting basic, with the 3 different counting methods, okay? Here's what that would sound like. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 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 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a 1E and a 2E and a 3 and a 4. 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a 1. Same thing, moving incrementally, accenting the different subdivisions against that. Start with the E of 1. 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a. Same thing, moving incrementally with the subdivisions against this exercise and accenting each subdivision. So we'll start with the E, and this is what that would sound like. 1E and a 2E and a 3 and a 4E and a 1E and a 2E and a 3 and a 4. 1E and a 2E and a 3 and a 4E and a 1E and a 2E and a 3 and a 4. 1E and a 2E and a 3 and a 4E and a 1E and a 2E and a 3 and a 4E and a 1E and a 2E and a 3 and a 4E and a 1. You can also eliminate the counting. Just focus on that one subdivision without the rest of the subdivisions. 1E and a 2E and a 3 and a 4E and a E, 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 E. So you can see where, this could get difficult. The thing you want to remember is, you don't want to dedicate all the time you have to doing this. Keep track of where you left off. Maybe spend a half hour on this a day. Again, don't forget, the topic of this video and the category of this video is time. So the exercises within this video that I'm giving you all relate to your time awareness and development. So I don't want you to think that this is the end all be all. This is the only thing you should work on every day. No, this is just one element. It's kind of comprehensive. There's a lot involved here. But again, do a little every day. And you'll find yourself becoming more and more comfortable with playing to a time source. So the last demonstration I'll do here in counting is I'll take the three methods of counting and I'll apply them to a more complex rhythm. So right now I'll play a songo and I'm going to move through the different counting methods and subdivisions, okay? Here we go. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1E and a 2E and a 3 and a 4E and a 3 and a 4E and a 1E and a 2E and a 3 and a 4E and a 1E and a 2E and a 3 and a 4E and a 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. So again, you can see by that example, my concentration and focus first and foremost is on the time. Counting out loud against everything you're playing helps you to realize whether or not you've got a good grasp on the time or not, okay? This is not about taking a lick you learn on YouTube, a lick you learn in a book, and learning that and making the time secondary. Well, wherever it happens to be, it happens. No, you want to know where you are at all times. Otherwise, these licks that you're learning, these exercises that you're learning, they're useless. So definitely take these methods and apply them to anything you learn, and you will, after you do this for a while, you will find yourself having a great handle on being able to play to a time source, which is like 85% of what we do, okay? The other 15% is like playing fills, playing licks. So let's, take a good part of our time and dedicate it to the 85% of what we're going to play. It just makes the most sense, right? So another exercise that you can do without even actually sitting behind a drum kit is taking these three counting methods, these three different subdivisions, and counting to tunes you might be listening to. You're in the car, going to school, going to work, whatever. Count through them. Shout out and accent the different subdivisions. See if you can do that. That could be difficult as well because your first and primary focus, what we're normally used to doing is focusing on the tune first, not so much on the time. Reverse that. Focus on the time and how the tune is fitting against that, fitting against what you're counting and against those subdivisions that you're accenting. So you can see how that feels. By doing this more regularly, you will become more familiar. There's that word again. You'll become more familiar with that situation. And when you're familiar with a situation, it breeds being comfortable, which then breeds confidence, which then again breeds freedom, which is ultimately where we're trying to get. To be free to play what we want against the time. All right? Okay, so that's all for this video. Thanks very much for watching, and please keep an eye out for the next installment of the Time Music Me video series. This is Fran Merante. Take care. Bye-bye.